Hello, it's March 2023, and this video is inspired by a video that I had seen with regards to a neighbor of an elderly man in an apartment building who made a false accusation against the elderly man, and the police were called to deal with this individual. And there was a so-called witness that was with the female who wasn't even there when the alleged event took place, and he said that. Now, it doesn't stop there. These two officers went to this elderly man's door and banged on the door. They didn't identify themselves. They didn't say police or anything else. They banged on the door. So this elderly man, not knowing who it is, thinking that it was this crazy female neighbor, and who knows who else, answered the door, but he had something in his hand in case he was being attacked. Now this is where everything starts to escalate beyond stupid. The police push him back. He puts this, we'll call it as a descriptive of a sword. You can see that in the video. And he puts it on a top shelf, on top of a bookcase. And the police wanted to come out, and he said no. He wanted to know what was going on. So they tasered him. And then they dragged him by his ankles, literally, into the hallway. And he was unconscious. And now this is where we have the second false allegation of the story coming in. The male officer goes into this guy's apartment because he's seen where he put this sword. It looks like it was made out of wood. He takes it out of the apartment, off the shelf, and then proceeds to plant it in the hallway. And when the elderly man was coming to, the male officer, because there was a female officer there, he said, "You know what this is?" And the elderly man was confused. Like, how did that get in the hallway? And so this male officer said that he came out in the hall and attacked him with it. And that's why they did what they did to him. Long story short, and the body cams show everything from both officers' perspectives. He ended up, and he was charged and everything else for resisting, the usual assaulting them nonsense. But the body cams vindicated him, and he ended up successfully suing them for $7 million. When I had seen this video and what had transpired, it hit home for me. Now, I've talked about my story. Now, I'm just going to interject real quick here. The officer in the elderly man's story had planted evidence in the hallway that belonged to the elderly man. He took it out of his apartment. He planted that evidence. Now, in my story, the one former officer went through my backpack, which had my laptop and some other electronic equipment, and pulled it all out in the back of my vehicle. And then when other officers came and to the scene, they had seen that and verified, yes, all this stuff was sitting in the back. But he had planted evidence that belonged to me, just as with the elderly man and these two officers. Now, on the flip side, I'm just going to really quickly say they can also suppress evidence. So they found these pills on me for my abdominal, and that's when they really started to beat me, saying that we got here and just in time, you sick fuck, we know what you're about to do to her. But they suppressed that, I'm assuming, because once they realized that it's just stuff you get off the shelf, they suppressed that. So I have in my story an example of them somewhat planting evidence that belonged to me, as well as suppressing evidence that really wasn't evidence. How, while setting aside whoever was behind the female who falsely accused me. Now again, I want to highlight something about this false accusation by this female. I don't even know what happened. Apparently, it was an anonymous tip via an untraceable email. And later I would learn that it was to a university who had no direct affiliation with the nonprofit organization that I was whistleblowing and exposing about the sexual abuse, sex trafficking of these women. But if I'm not mistaken, the person who sent that email did have ties with certain individuals who, we'll say, knew of or participated with what was going on. The female denied saying anything. I don't know. There's a lot of the story that I don't know. Setting all that aside, there was a false accusation regarding or by the female centered to my story. So there's one false allegation. Then the second false allegation in my story that parallels this elderly man's was the two former officers, they're not officers anymore, ended up falsely accusing me of allegedly obstruction and allegedly assaulting them because they were trying to protect themselves. So I've highlighted my story, how lies compounded on top of lies, and we can even incorporate miscommunication in there, as with my story throughout my history. How easy it is. And this video with this elderly man shows how a female falsely accused the neighbor of punching her in the face and all this other nonsense. No injuries, no blood, no nothing, but she's just spewing off nonsense. And these two officers went and attacked this elderly man. So the same thing with my story. Now, these two former officers of my story made it very clear why they did what they did to me. It had to do with the female. And then everything went sideways for them and everyone involved. So I know a lot of people have a hard time trying to, well, how can this be like one lie after another? For example, with my story, a false accusation followed by another false accusation by, different individuals, but all connected. It's easy. And that's what I really want to highlight with this video. How easy it is for one person to lie, or there's a lie based on this person, and then other people will jump aboard and lie, perhaps even thinking that they're doing the right thing. Because, hey, why not? Whoever is being falsely accused must have done something. It's easy to do. And this happens in everyday life to a lot of people, probably most people to some degree. And usually, most times, almost all the time perhaps, it ends up being nothing. But I just really want to stress how I've been trying to explain the complexity of my story that began as whistleblowing, exposing the sexual abuse, trafficking of these vulnerable women at a nonprofit mental health organization, and then it escalated, just like with this elderly man's story. Things just escalated beyond stupid for him, just like with me. Now, fortunately, whatever charges were laid, obviously they were dropped, everything else, and the elderly man did suffer a stroke after being tased. But it's very, very easy when we can see how easy it is. Because you have people who have no regard for other people, physically, emotionally, or anything, who, I'm just trying to think of a proper descriptive, who as a descriptive, criminal-minded, and who will falsely accuse. And it just compounds. And when you have a series of these things happening in your life, it makes it hard for other people to understand or even believe that something like that's even possible. So I just want to give you something to think about here with how lies can be compounded with other people, and other people will make uninformed conclusions, for example, based on what they hear and act upon it, whether it be doing something physical, as the two officers and the elderly man, or even in my story, or even in support of, for example, with my story, how lawyers and anyone that was involved with my cases, the criminal matter as well as the lawsuit, just accepted the official narrative. People have been socially conditioned to just blindly accept something authoritative, which is absolutely ridiculous, because at the end of the day, it's only human beings. Everyone's just human beings. A title, a costume, or a uniform doesn't make someone more human than human. And I just want to close off by saying how society overall, people suffer from the Stockholm syndrome. They respect and fear the very people who impose injustice, tyranny, suppression, oppression, and people can't, even especially the people who call themselves awake or truthers or even freedom types, they have that barrier, and they're suffering from the Stockholm syndrome. And then we can get into, for example, the Aish experiment, the Milgram experiment, and even we can throw in the Stanford experiment, how all these things play a big role. And I'll continuously highlight the studies made famous by Julia Shaw, implanting false memories, how easy it is. And anyone who says that they're immune, they're delusional. So there's a lot of things to research, to consider, to get a better understanding how one false accusation by one person easily leads to another false accusation by another person, and then it just compounds, most times burying someone. Things to think about. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.
Listen to this and write it down if you can't remember it. You're never going to outgrow warfare. You simply must learn to fight. I hear people saying to me, oh, when is it going to get easier? When you die.